Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to what will probably end up being a video series. This is gonna end up being part one. I will most likely do numerous videos on this topic. And this video is gonna feature a new manual control SX-70. In fact, as far as I'm aware, it's the newest kid on the block that we've seen so far. You guys, if you're into instant photography, probably know about Mint's manual control cameras. As far as I am aware, Mint was the first company to commercially offer a product that provided manual control. They invented a brand new PCB for cameras. It has a dongle with a little rotary dial that selects different speeds. And as far as I'm aware, this was the first commercial product. I don't have a fully complete Mint camera because this one is actually broken. This one only selects 1/2000th of a second for like the first 6 speeds. So it's basically like 2000, 2000, 2000, 2000, 2000, 60. That's why it's in pieces. But yeah, these have been around for a long time, since like 2016. Some of you that are familiar with my channel will know of my Open SX-70 prototypes. The Open SX-70 was a project that sprang up around 2017 that ultimately was killed off by the COVID pandemic and subsequent chip shortages. It entered a sort of state of permanent sleep and is currently in the process of being revived. That will take on its own video at some stage. I promise I will eventually do a video on the Open SX-70 project. I've been meaning to do one for ages. I really want to dive into the history. But yeah, this is effectively the open source version of the Mint Time Machine. It works with a very similar principle, with the only real difference, I guess, being that there is a few extra features, such as like a built-in self-timer, and the ability to do double exposures, which is something that I will touch on in this series, I promise, so please stay tuned, because it's not a perfect solution. I know it's a feature that a lot of people want, but there's a reason that it's very difficult to achieve. Anyway, I digress. The Open SX-70 works in much the same way. This is a prototype, of course. These cameras never made it to market. There was never a finished version. Hopefully there will be. Maybe by the end of this year, or at least in the near future, but it works in much the same way. If you want to access manual speeds, there is a little dongle that inserts into the top. In this case, it's simply a bare PCB. And yeah, you basically just select your speed, and once your speed is all selected, you can just, once it's done timing itself, there we go, you can just take a photo. So yeah, really, really cool stuff. Like I said, this never really went past the prototype phase. I think there are maybe a dozen or so in existence in the wild. Hopefully we will see a product soon. Then, of course, we have the SX-70R, the PCB of which I've just finished installing in my client's very fancy gold sonar. This opted for a different design, the brainchild of Yongmin Lu from Canton in China. He sort of took the idea from the Mint and the Open SX-70 PCB, like the idea of a manual controlled motherboard that you could put into the camera to give you control over speeds, but he went in a completely different direction. Yongmin actually implemented the manual control via Bluetooth. So not only can you use an app on your phone, but you can use a dedicated dongle, of which there have been a few revisions. They're currently sold out. A new revision is on its way. But yeah, there is an iPhone app, an Android app, but you can also just simply use a dongle like I'm doing here. The benefit with the dongle, of course, is you also get some flash sync if you want to engage with studio stuff. But otherwise, it gives you control of the settings via a remote control, which, you know, you can leave on the camera if you want to plug it in, or you can just simply put it in your pocket, or you don't need the dongle at all. If you are the type of shooter that is mainly going to leave the camera set to automatic, or you can just simply have nothing attached to the camera and then just simply whip out your phone when you want to dial in some of the manual speeds. So you guys have, if you're fans of the channel, if you've been following me for a while, you very likely have seen these cameras before. I mean, the SX-70R is something that I've harped on about for many, many episodes by now. I'm quite heavily involved in the project, having helped beta test so many different iterations of the boards, and I invented the calibration technique that Yongmin and I now use for these cameras. So I want to tell you guys about the latest manual control camera, which some of you may be familiar with, and that is the SX-70 Alpha M by Polanthropy from London. Polanthropy is from what I understand, a relatively small SX-70 servicing company based in the UK, run by a guy called Dan Huey. Now, my understanding is that Dan does have a full-time job. I believe he's some kind of an engineer. I'm happy to be corrected if I've got that completely wrong, Dan. My understanding is that Dan does this as more of a hobby. So he's not like a massive business on the scale of someone like Retrospect or Mint. He built this, well, he invented this new board as a bit of a challenge to himself, sort of to prove that he could. My understanding is he does do repairs, but on a smaller scale. When we spoke years ago, I got the impression that his business was sort of more of a hobby. Whereas someone like myself, I do this full time, hence the YouTube channel, etc., etc. But he has invented his own manual control PCB. Now, that brings me to the crux of why this is going to be a video series instead of just a, review of this camera. And that is because this camera doesn't actually work. Which is a real bummer. It sort of works, so I will be able to demonstrate some of the features for you, but unfortunately the exposures on this thing are completely off. Now, I want to preface this by saying Dan did not build this camera. Whilst he invented the PCB and had the various different parts made, of which I'm going to demonstrate in just a second, he didn't assemble this camera. So if any issues about this camera are the byproduct of being assembled incorrectly, I would like to very much stress that this isn't Dan's fault. It's unfortunately the byproduct of whoever assembled this. Now, my understanding is that Dan hasn't personally sold any of these yet, or if he has, he's kept it pretty on the down low. My understanding is that there are, maybe a dozen or so of these things floating around, having been built by different people. My understanding is that Dan sent off the PCBs and bits and pieces, as well as some instructions, in the form of a bit of a kit for other technicians to assemble and then resell the cameras. And this is such a camera. This camera, the reason that it's in my hands is I was emailed by a client of mine who purchased this, and he liked it, but the only thing he didn't like about it is there was no I-type adapter, right? Like my PolaVolt solution that you see here on my Open SX-70 camera. And my client thought, wow, this thing's really, really cool. It's got, and like I said, I'll show you the features and why this is so different in just a second, but he didn't like the fact that it could only take 600 films, so he asked if, in exchange for me making a video about this camera, I could do my PolaVolt battery mod. And I agreed to do that. I said, hey, look, this is normally not something that I do, but, I'm happy to do a bit of an exchange provided you pay for postage. I'll get a video content out of it. It's really just going to take me time because the parts of a PolaVolt don't cost all that much. It's really just labor. I was happy to do that trade. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't work, as I said. Now, I've got some hunches as to why it doesn't work, but I think what I'll do first is I'll go through the features of the camera, then I'll go through what exactly happened to it when I tried to take some sample photos, what I plan on doing with it going forwards. So, what makes the Alpha M different to other SX-70s is it has on the back, now you might see some scrolling. See how it's kind of flashing? That's just because of the display hertz not synchronizing up with my camera. In person, this display is completely static. It's got a little OLED screen. at the back that tells you what settings your camera is using. Now, unlike the Open SX-70 or the SX-70R, which has a physical dongle, there are actually buttons on the back of this camera. So cycling through the settings allows you to go to 8,000th, 4,000, 2,000, 1,500, 250, all the way down to 1 second and then bulb mode. Beyond bulb mode, you also have double exposure mode and co-up. I think that's like a multiple exposure mode. I could be getting that completely wrong. I don't know what co-up means. I wasn't provided any instructions, but I think it has something to do with more exposures. If I got that fact wrong, I'll either correct myself in the next video or I'll put it up on screen. But yeah, it works otherwise like a regular SX-70 camera. Those that are very observant might notice that when I put a pack of film in, I'm just using an empty pack here to demonstrate, the shutter blades do this kind of like snap snap, and I believe that what that's demonstrating, I don't think that's a bug, I believe what that's demonstrating is that it is currently set for 640 ISO film. I believe you can set this thing to SX-70 film and it will snap only once. So watch the blades. See how you get that audible sound, that click click? Now that is possible, of course, because the dark slide automatically ejects. If I was to modify it to, for example, take the PolaVolt lithium-ion battery solution, I would have to disable that function because with my PolaVolt solution, and honestly, for that matter, really, if you're going to I-type modify an SX-70, you want to disable the automatic ejection somehow. Because otherwise, when there is no film in the camera, if you accidentally close that door while the camera is powered up, it's going to cycle every single time and it's going to close the aperture blades waiting for the counter to become engaged and it's going to burn out your electronics. It's just not a good idea. So the reason that it has that little double click and the reason that Dan could do that is because this isn't I-type modified. So that little feature that I'm pointing out there will hopefully be able to be disabled if and when I get around to PolaVolt modding this particular camera. As I said, otherwise, the buttons on the back, they're very nice. They're nice to touch. When I saw this, I wasn't quite sure because I believe that this is like a 3D printed plastic. It is a very high quality 3D print and it feels nice and flexible. One interesting thing that I've noticed is I believe Dan has wired up the solenoid for the autofocus system to act as like a bit of a haptic engine, kind of like on a phone. You know, like boomers do it a lot, like they have the haptics on so their phone's like tick 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 when they're tapping away on the keyboard. This does the same kind of thing. When you click that button, it clicks away inside the sonar assembly. Now, I think it would be nice if you could turn that feature off, because at first I couldn't figure out why the camera was making noises. Then I thought, oh, that's kind of clever. It's like haptic feedback. And then after a while, that noise just became annoying to me. I would very much prefer to turn that off. But that's just me. I think it would be nice. Maybe there is a way to turn it off in the app, because this camera also has a dedicated app. Now, unfortunately, two problems. As far as I'm aware, it's only on iPhone. And I tried to borrow an iPhone for this video, only to realize that here in Australia, I can't download the app. It seems to be geo-locked to like the USA. So, Dan, I don't know if you're watching and you can fix that problem. That's pretty annoying. I would love to see an Android version of this app. And the reason that it can have an app is because, like the SX-70R, right? This thing also has Bluetooth. So it has the physical section, but it also has a Bluetooth ability. Not only does it have Bluetooth, it's the exact same Bluetooth module as found on the SX-70R. I don't know if that's a coincidence or Dan took some inspiration there from Yongmin's design. But yeah, it uses the same Bluetooth board, meaning that rather hilariously, you can use the SX-70R app. In fact, let me just see if I can pull it up on my phone here. Apparently, it will show up in the app. Yeah, here we go, Alpha M73. It says connected. I don't think it'll work though. Yeah. So it does pick it up. I'm just going to disable that. It does pick it up, but obviously the code is completely different, so the app doesn't understand what this camera is, but it does connect. But yes, apparently you get the same controls that you have on the back of the camera here, but you do have it in the form of an iPhone app. So, in terms of what I know you guys are asking now, I absolutely can just about guarantee that those viewing this video at home will be going, well, Jake, tell us which one's better so we can send you a camera and you can upgrade it and build it for me. Which one? Should I go for SX-70R? Should I wait for Open SX-70 to come out? Should I wait for the Alpha M? To be honest, provided that a PCB is calibrated correctly, and provided that the manual timing is set properly and the shutter is calibrated and the solenoid and stuff is all worked out, they're all going to be about the same. You know what I mean? Like, really the only difference you're going to get is like infrared filtration. Like, for example, I believe that some of Mint's earliest cameras had rather weak infrared filtration, which meant that, and Mint covered this on their own website, which meant that in their very early sensors, if you took a photo with like a lot of plants, because plants emit infrared light, your photos would tend to become underexposed. But honestly, provided that something is built correctly, like shutter speeds are pretty standard, right? There's no art to this. Provided the camera is calibrated and refurbished properly, honestly, they're all going to perform about the same. I can take one of the original PCBs, right, from the 1970s, and I can clean these up and 600 modify them and get them incredibly accurate too. The PCB is not really what determines the accuracy, it's the servicing. The big area where the PCB is going to improve things, though, is reliability. The PCB that's in this camera in the Alpha M right now is brand new. It's months old by this point, right? It's not 50 years old, using analog circuitry, which can drift values over time. That's the big advantage here. And I say this as someone that builds SX-70R cameras all the time. In fact, my policy ever since February this year is I don't use original PCBs anymore. I have thousands of these. Okay, thousands. I got hundreds of these spare, right? Because I don't use them. The reason that I don't use them is not because I believe everyone needs manual settings on their cameras. It's because of the reliability. The SX-70R PCB, I can buy brand new from Yongmin. He can ship them over to me, you know, dozens and dozens of them at a time, and I can be guaranteed perfectly reliable, brand new, working cameras with brand new sensors that haven't corroded, that take stunning automatic exposed photos. You know, I've shown off time and time again that SX-70R cameras are capable of just amazing exposures on automatic mode. This one had a bit of compensation because Luna is a black dog, but you get what I'm saying? Like, it's perfectly exposed because the PCB's brand new, it's reliable, and once you dial in that shutter, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything. It's just super accurate. So, when it comes to like which one of these is better, there's not really a clear answer here. Like, this is, if you're looking for a like definitive, this one is the best, then you're not going to find that in this video, right? The big difference between these cameras is how they work, and that's going to be a personal preference. I know for a fact that I have a lot of clients that absolutely under no circumstances wish to change the cosmetic appearance of their camera, but they still want the high performance. And this is why I've chosen this example. This was sent to me by a client of mine named Martin. This thing is a time capsule, right? At the moment, I haven't put the bottom leather panel on just yet, but I actually have managed to salvage it from the bottom of the camera, and I've put new adhesive on there, and that's going to go back on there because Martin wanted this thing to be a complete sleeper. Everything about this camera looks completely original, but it's had an upgraded motor, it's got the new PCB, and it performs absolutely awesome. So, like I said, it really depends. So I know that the SX-70R, because it doesn't have anything that physically has to attach to the camera, you know, even if you have the dedicated dongle, right, you don't need to attach it for it to work. You can just simply, you know, turn it on, wait for it to scan, pick up the camera, and then, you know, just quickly dial in the settings you want using the little wheel. It's got great little tactile feedback here. I know that a lot of clients just want to leave this thing on auto and use the new PCB as an, you know, super reliable automatic mode. So I think a benefit to the SX-70R is that it doesn't cosmetically alter anything. But that's just one type of customer. I have other customers and clients of mine who want to go balls to the wall crazy. I have people that want crazy clear housings and they don't care about aesthetics, so they will put the PolaVolt on there. In fact, they love the fact that the camera looks modified now. They love the fact that the Open SX-70 has a bare PCB just jutting out of the top. They know that it looks crazy, and because the client is a little bit crazy, they really appreciate that. Well, the SX-70 Alpha M by Polanthropy here falls into that latter category. You can clearly see that the camera has been modified. So the leather has to be cut to a special shape because it has to now house the buttons that you click to change the settings. And if you guys can see, there's that little like line running down there. There's actually a ribbon cable that goes from the shutter. It goes underneath the viewfinder panel down. And so the viewfinder sticker has to be longer to come down the back and then attach to the top. Now, I know for a fact that that cosmetic change will drive some clients completely and utterly nuts. They will hate that with a passion. And it's all just a personal preference, right? So I don't necessarily think that there is a winner, right, per se, as much as there is just different ways of doing things. The Alpha M, clearly it cosmetically alters the camera. I know I have some clients that will hate that because they think that the, you know, appearance has been besmirched and Dr. Land will be rolling around in his grave. It's all just, you know, how you feel personally. But I think beyond what it looks like is how it performs. And that leads me to the problem of this particular camera and why I will end up doing this as a video series, because this is the kind of results that the camera delivers. That's automatic mode. That's what 1/2000th of a second looks like. Another one at 1/2000. 1/4000 was hardly any better. I tried 1/4000 again and got a black image, so the shutter refused to fire at all. And then the same thing. And then I decided to put it on auto. Now that one did turn out okay, but I was actually completely obscured by shadows in that photo. And when it did kick in, that's the kind of image I got instead. So these were both taken on auto, and I don't know what the difference. It's like it worked okay here and not here. I'm not entirely sure. Slow speed seemed to work okay. So 15th of a second, that was perfect. That's the only photo that I got that I would say is perfectly exposed. Then I tried more 1/4000th of a setting of a second. I actually believe that this one was 1/8000th, and again, shutter failure. It didn't open at all. Now, the reason for that, I believe, is that this camera has not been serviced properly. I believe that what has happened is the technician has installed the new PCB, but hasn't actually done any of the other calibration that is so important. And I think that's something that I want to stress here, because, and Yongmin's finding this out the hard way actually, SX-70R PCBs, like if you really want to, you can buy one of these from him. You can go on the website, you can order one from China. If you're in the USA, you might have to pay tariffs on that now. I think these are about $70 US each. You can buy these. If you are very good at soldering and you want a weekend project and you have all the tools, you can install one of these on your own. But if you think that you can just slap one of these PCBs in your camera and expect amazing results, well, I gotta tell you, you got another thing coming. It is so important that you don't just do that, that you fully strip down the camera and overhaul it, as I've done here, so that you can get the best results. And that's why, in the example photos I was showing you from my SX-70R, from the many that I've built, the exposures are perfect, and why this one has completely washed out. Now, I tried multiple packs of film. It was not a film issue. The camera just does not function. Now, the client that sent the camera to me also said he had a lot of washed out photos, but he thought that maybe he was just having a bad pack of film because he only tried the one before he rapidly shipped it out to me. So, as I said at the start of this video, my impression is that what's happened is Dan has built a stack of these PCBs and he sent them out to various technicians, and the technicians then aim to install them and then sell the cameras on, and that's how my client got this camera. Well, I don't want this video to come across as negative, me saying that any one particular technician has done a bad job, and I'm certainly not going to say that if the technician did a bad job on this camera that they're going to continuously do bad jobs. And that is because we must remember Hanlon's razor. Hanlon's razor is a philosophical quandary that states you should never attribute to malice that which cannot be adequately explained by stupidity. It's basically a way of saying, well, humans make mistakes all the time. They're not trying to be bad people. They're probably just making a mistake, right? And I think that's what's happened here. By all things that I can see, and I have peeked inside this camera, as far as I can tell, this camera was assembled maybe to the point of testing, then I can only assume it got mixed up and sent out in the finished pile, when in actuality it still needed a lot more work and calibrating. That's the only way that I can assume that this has gone out there, because it's certainly not ready for prime time. I can only guess that the particular technician that built this camera might have been stressed or rushed or simply got confused and sent out the camera, or had someone else deskin it or something like that, and it got to the client without being serviced properly. So I'm going to point out some of the issues that I found just from sort of my visual inspection so far. I want to point out what I believe is wrong with the camera, and then what I plan on doing over the next few videos is fixing this. And hopefully we'll be able to I-type convert it as well. Now, in terms of the shutter, I believe that what's happening here is that the solenoid is not even anywhere close to being calibrated. I believe that the pneumatic adjustment screw is way too loose, and that the reason that I believe that is the higher, faster speed settings are completely washed out, whereas the slower ones worked okay. And basically the way that solenoid pneumatics work in an SX-70 is that the pneumatic adjustment really only affects fast speeds. Slow speeds it doesn't really affect. Anything below 1/25th of a second is going to expose just fine. And that's one of the reasons why you should never simply just test an SX-70 by taking a photo indoors, because it's not a good test to see if the camera works properly. If you want to test an SX-70, you have to take it outside and take a photo in EV17 or EV18, equivalent to about 1/2000th of a second at f8 or higher. There's a few other problems with the camera. The leather is, in my opinion, not the best. It's a little bit lumpy, like for what is otherwise supposed to be a flat leather. The front sonar housing, I don't know if you guys can see, but it's actually 3D printed. So my guess is this camera had a smashed housing at some stage, but instead of finding a spare part replacement, they 3D printed a new one, which is fairly impressive. It's just that it doesn't really fit the best. It's kind of bowed up at the top here. I don't know if you guys can pick it up on camera, but like the top part looks a little bit warped. And most importantly, the autofocus switch, which is original, just, it doesn't feel great. Like it feels like it's about to break at any second. There is also fungus in the lens, which, I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. It's very fine and hard to see, but there is fungus in the lens, which is a bit of a netty no-no in terms of refurbishing a camera for a client. You absolutely have to check for that and make sure that it's going back to your client clean optically. It's not good practice to leave the fungus in there. So that is something that I'll be cleaning out when I refurbish this thing. And the other thing is just the quality of the soldering on this just isn't like as good as what I can do. I know for a fact that I can solder the ribbons and the boards on this camera way better than what's been done here. Now, in terms of the 1-4000 being completely black, this is a bit of a mystery for me. There's a few possibilities here. Number one, there's some kind of a firmware issue with the camera where the higher speeds just don't work properly. Number two, there's some kind of perhaps power issue with the camera where the solenoid, just like the electric eye or something, isn't getting the right amount of electricity and it's failing. So I should be able to hopefully give this camera a bit of a smoother power supply. Like even if this doesn't fix it, giving a camera a good power supply is just good practice anyway. What I can do is put a 16,000 RPM motor in that. They're slightly underclocked. They'd turn a little bit slower than the stock factory original while still giving very steady ejection, about on par with the Polaroid i2. If I put a slower motor in there, it's going to draw less amps, meaning that the Bluetooth board and all the PCB and the display should hopefully... because there's a lot of things that take power on this camera. There's a display, you've got the new PCB, Bluetooth board, the sonar assembly. If I put a motor that takes a bit less juice, I should be able to hopefully fix that if that's the issue. Obviously, once I get this thing working, I want to try and PolaVolt mod this if I can. Before I drill any holes in the body, I am going to test it just with this little portable version of the PolaVolt that I made out of a dead reservoir adapter. And yeah, effectively this is going to be a challenge for me because I've never serviced one of these cameras before. In fact, not only have I never serviced them, I've never even held one until now, and there's zero information about them. So I'm truly going in blind. So this is going to be a real test of my ability as a repairman when it comes to fixing this. Dan, at the time that I spoke to him, because I told him about the problems on this camera, he was on holiday, so he actually wasn't able, he either didn't want to or he wasn't able to tell me a lot about how the actual things worked. I don't have any firmware, I don't have anything to flash it, so if I can get this camera working, it's purely going to be the result of my skill in terms of what I can do to the body of the camera itself. So I'm very much looking forwards to seeing if I can rescue this thing. Because yeah, there's quite literally no information. I don't even have the iPhone app. So everything that I'm gonna have to do to this camera is gonna be my hands and my diagnostic ability going in completely blind, knowing nothing about the schematics or how any of this works. So this is truly gonna be a bit of reverse engineering for me, and I hope you guys will find this video series entertaining. Hopefully I can come out with like a video a week, but I don't know, it might take me a month or so depending on how difficult this thing is. When I wire up the PolaVolt, I'm going to show you guys a new method that I use in terms of wiring them up, which is a bit less destructive to the original ribbon cable. So that will also be a nice little bonus. But yeah, as I said, I think probably the take-home message here, and I have so much train of thought going on, but Yongmin's finding this out the hard way because he has sent PCBs off to quite a few people who have been, you know, putting them in cameras and selling them on eBay as like upgraded, only for the cameras to not work properly because the technician hasn't done the correct servicing. And I think this is yet another good example that if you're going to sell a product like a PCB, you have to make sure that the person that's installing them knows what they're doing, especially if that person is then going to sell them on. Because if someone spent hundreds of US dollars acquiring this, they're going to be pretty annoyed that their camera doesn't take photos properly. Now, the last thing that I will add, you might be asking, well, why doesn't the client just send this thing back to the person he bought it off of? Well, the trust in that person has been completely destroyed because the camera has arrived in such a state. And the client basically told me, look, at this stage, I trust your professional opinion. Let's see what you can do with it. So, if all else fails, I'm at least going to resolder everything and get the body working in tip-top condition. Even if it turns out that this camera can't be salvaged because the PCB is faulty, well, at least I can get the body operating to a point where I can send it back, or Dan can send me replacement parts. I don't know, we'll figure something out. But I should at least be able to improve things, either to the point where we can then install a new Alpha M PCB, or simply I'll just be able to get it to work. So stay tuned for all that. Just one more thing that I would like to add, and I promise this is my last thought. I don't really like the name SX-70 Alpha M. And the reason for that is it kind of reminds me of the Simpsons steamed ham skit, but for SX-70s, where Superintendent Chalmers would go something like, yes, and you call it the Alpha M, despite the fact that it is clearly a sonar. Yes. I don't think adding the word alpha to a camera with autofocus does the community any favors, because Polaroid cameras are already incredibly confusingly named. And that's because Polaroid decided to name the SX-70 lots of different things depending on which market it was sold at. And that's why you will end up with, look at this mouthful. Polaroid SX-70 land camera sonar one step, right? So many things. Don't add alpha and M to the end of that as well. Polaroid SX-70 land camera sonar one step alpha M. Like it's too much. Especially because alpha and sonar are different types of cameras. I think that it's going to end up confusing people. For the record, an alpha camera is sort of what you get if you had a sonar but without the autofocus. This is an alpha, not this. As I said, there's so many different names already, and people get very easily confused. In Europe, they called this like the sonar, what else? They called it the Time Zero sonar. I'm sure they use like Polasonic or something like that for certain branding. Anyway, there's a lot of different variations. I think it would have been wiser to label it something different. And honestly, the answer was right there. The Alpha and the Omega, right? I mean, B comes after A, but you don't want to call it the SX-70 Beta because that makes it sound like it's subpar. But the SX-70 Omega would be a really cool name for this camera, especially if you're trying to advertise that it's like a mega SX-70. I think that name's a no-brainer. I think Alpha M is not great. I think SX-70M is better, just the M suffix. I don't think it needs the word alpha in there. Just my 2 cents. Like I said, I'm not a linguistics expert or anything like that. I just think that that's a better naming system. And I'm not just picking on you, Dan. I also think that Mint did a terrible job of naming their manual control cameras. They could have just called it the Time Machine, right? But instead they've got like SLR-670. Now, to me, that name suggests that the camera has a built-in flash and autofocus, but they don't. They're basically just alphas. The Mint SLR-670 just looks like this. It just looks like that. So, I think they should have just stuck to the name Time Machine and not decided to add SLR-670 to the mix. And then they had other variations of that, like SLR-670S, SLR-670X. It's a terrible naming system. I don't think Alpha M is the worst name that you could have chosen to call this, but I just don't think it's the best either. So, personally, if it was my invention, I would have called it the SX-70 Omega, with the Omega PCB, but really any Greek alphabet letter would have done. But yeah, anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's really just a bit of an introduction and me waffling on for like a lot of different tangents, having to explain things. But I mean, if you guys are subscribed to the channel, that's probably what you came here for anyway, listening to my mouth just motor on and on and on and on. Yeah, hopefully this becomes like a bit of a repair video, and hopefully I'm successfully able to get this thing working so that I can do a proper comparison review. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. And yeah, let's see where this goes, hey?